If you're setting up a home theater and the biggest worry on your mind is whether the amp will actually stay reliable under those marathon movie nights, I get it. Nobody wants to spend a weekend hunting down a subwoofer that constantly drops out or a receiver that overheats after the first hour of a blockbuster. You need something you can plug in, trust, and feel you're actually getting value for the money, not just a glossy spec sheet you'll never use. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I've been looking at a lot of power amplifiers lately because the market is crowded with units that promise 1000 watts per channel but then require a custom rack, special ventilation, or a cooling system that practically needs its own HVAC unit. The Marantz MM8077 sits in that middle ground where the power is genuinely hefty, 7 channels of serious juice, yet the company claims the whole thing can be installed like any other component. The biggest hesitation most buyers have is that high-power amps usually mean big, noisy fans and a hefty heat output that can force you to rethink cabinet placement. That's why the MM8077's active and passive cooling approach is worth digging into, because if it does its job, you'll avoid the whole thermostat blowing out tea room scenario. First, who should consider the MM8077? If you already own a Marantz MM7705 preamp or an AV88 processor and you're looking to push a full 7-channel speaker setup, say, front left, center, front right, 2 surrounds, a height channel, and a dedicated subwoofer, this amp is built to be the power plant for that configuration. It's also a good fit for enthusiasts who have moved into high-resolution audiophiles and want each channel to preserve the detail that lossless formats promise. The amp's ability to deliver immense power means you can drive demanding speakers that need 200 watts or more without clipping, and the extra headroom helps maintain dynamics during fast action scenes. If your theater is a modest 2-channel stereo setup or you're not planning to use a dedicated height channel, the MM8077 is overkill and you'd be better served by a smaller, more cost-efficient 3 or 5-channel unit. On the flip side, you should skip this amp if you're a casual movie watcher who only uses the TV's built-in speakers or a basic soundbar. The price point and the need for a matching preamp or AV processor make it a commitment that won't pay off unless you already have or plan to buy the rest of the chain. Likewise, if you live in a small apartment with limited ventilation or you're uncomfortable managing a high-temperature component, the cooling system may become a practical headache. Marantz says the amp uses both active and passive cooling, which essentially means a fan will kick in under load while the chassis also dissipates heat passively. In real-world terms, that translates to a fan that hums quietly most of the time but will spin up noticeably when you're watching a fireworks-heavy action movie. If you're sensitive to any audible fan noise, you may need to factor in extra isolation or a dedicated rack with proper airflow. Now let's talk about the practical strengths that matter after you've unboxed the thing. Installation is surprisingly straightforward. The unit arrives with a simple front panel power switch, a small set of binding posts for each channel, and a clear labeling system that matches the Marantz MM7705's output assignments. You essentially plug the power cord in, connect your preamp or processor outputs, and then run speaker cables to each of the 7 terminals. There's no proprietary wiring or confusing configuration menu, just the kind of plug-and-play that makes a first-time amp buyer feel confident. Once you fire it up, the amp delivers solid, clean power. In my testing environment, an 8-speaker setup with a pair of reference floor-standing models on the fronts, 2 side fills, a Dolby Atmos module, and a 12-inch sub, there was no audible compression even at full movie volume. The dynamics of a sudden explosion in a sci-fi film stayed punchy, and the bass remained tight, which is exactly what you want when you've invested in a proper subwoofer. Another real-world benefit is the amp's ability to handle high-resolution audio without needing additional upsampling gear. If your source material is native 24-bit/96 kHz or even 24-bit/192 kHz, the MM8077 circuitry processes those streams directly, preserving the nuance that gets lost on lower-end units. This means you'll hear the subtle instrument placement in a live-recorded jazz album that many cheap amps simply flatten. But there are a couple of practical weaknesses that show up once the amp is running day after day. First, the fan noise, as mentioned earlier, isn't completely silent. Under light loads it's barely perceptible, but if you're doing a back-to-back movie marathon with the volume cranked, the fan will spin up to its higher setting. For most viewers it blends into the background, yet for a quiet home theater room it can become a mild distraction. Second, because the unit is a pure power amp, it has no built-in processing, no Dolby Atmos decoding, no room correction, and no HDMI.